Lally's game. You may kiss your bride, the minister told Cade. Cade leaned down and took Selena in his arms. His embrace made her think of all their history together. It reminded her of how much she loved him. So as she kissed him, she tucked away her nebulous distrust. Over 100 people attended Selena and Cade's wedding, and because they'd been instructed to dress to have fun, don't dress to impress, everyone had a roaring good time. The food was incredible, and the local acoustic band was unexpectedly talented and played everything from bluegrass to rock to classical, which managed to make everyone happy at one point or another. Dancing wasn't one of Cade's talents. A man had to have some shortcomings. He managed to shuffle through their slow song, and he got silly and jerked around the dance floor like a man being electrocuted during the fast songs. Selena danced her heart out. She had a blast. At the end of the reception, before Selena and Cade got in their SUV, now bedecked in streamers and tin cans and featuring a Just Hitch sign in the back, Selena's family came up to her to wish her well. Selena's handsome gray-haired dad, happily casual in slacks and an open-collared pale blue shirt, hugged her first. As he held her close, he whispered, "I'm so proud of you. Remember, be your own person. Trust your instincts. Always choose joy." Selena pulled back and smiled into her dad's wet eyes. She wiped her own tears away. "I love you, Dad." Her brother hugged her next. He too whispered some advice in her ear. "Don't screw it up." When Selena's mom, who stuck to her guns and wore an expensive designer crepe gown for the wedding, Selena had to admit it suited her lovely, tall, and regal mother, put her arms around Selena last and asked, "Are you happy?" Selena was honestly able to answer, "Yes." By then, Selena had nearly forgotten about the odd feeling she had about Cade. She decided she just had pre-wedding jitters. That decision was solidified during the 2 blissful weeks that followed. Cade and Selena had decided to postpone their honeymoon. For one thing, Cade had just started his new job, and for another thing, they wanted to funnel their free time and their money into fixing up the farmhouse. Accordingly, they spent their wedding night in their new home. The next day was a Sunday, and they spent the day cuddled up in their new 4-poster king-sized bed, their wedding present to each other, poring over design magazines and paint chips. It might not have been everyone's idea of a perfect day, but Selena felt like she was floating on a cloud. The floating cloud, however, plummeted to earth the next day. Cade went off to work before 7 a.m. on Monday. Selena started her day more leisurely. Although Cade loved to go for runs in the morning, Selena didn't like an early rise, and she didn't like running either, for that matter. After Cade left, she went for a long, brisk walk, and when she came back, she made herself some peach spice herbal tea. Still wearing the leggings and t-shirt she wore on her walk, Selena loved working at home. She took the tea into her office at about 9:30. Selena's office was a small spare room just off the living room. All it contained at the moment was a white metal folding table that held her laptop and a desk lamp, her soft gray tall-back desk chair, the only piece of office furniture she splurged on, and stacks of file boxes. Selena had big plans for this room, which she intended to implement over the coming week. But first, she needed to do a little actual work. Still floating in post-wedding euphoria, Selena smiled as she opened her laptop. She clicked on the icon for her website dashboard, and she began reading her most recent reader comments and responding to them. In the third comment, the reader thanked Selena for helping to keep old baggage in the past. The words completely derailed Selena's plans to work, because they immediately made Selena think of Cade's hidden past and his unnatural reaction to her curiosity about his hideous trunk. Selena responded to the reader's comment, but she wasn't able to concentrate on the next one. She stood. She was going to find out what was in the trunk. Selena didn't know whether Cade's trunk had anything to do with whatever happened at Freddy's Pizzaplex, but he'd had the same strained reaction to both things, and Selena had felt the same disquieting feeling about both subjects. Something that Selena couldn't put a finger on told her that the two things were linked. After the confrontation over the trunk in the living room on the day the movers had delivered their stuff, Cade had picked up the trunk and said, "I'll stick this in the darkest corner of the attic. You'll never have to see it again." He'd grinned and winked at Selena, and she smiled back. However, their light exchange had been fake. Recalling the moment now, Selena remembered how forced the grin, wink, and smile had been. "What if I want to see it again?" Selena said out loud now. She closed her laptop and stood. Selena's tennis shoes made little squeaks against the old, uneven hardwood flooring as she strode out of her office and trotted up to the second floor. When she reached that floor, she hurried down the long hall toward the doorway to the attic. Reaching the door, she took a deep breath and yanked it open. A puff of dust wafted into the hall, making Selena sneeze. A faintly musty smell followed the dust. Unlike the attic in the house Selena had grown up in, which had one of those pull-down staircases, the farmhouse's attic was reached by a normal flight of stairs, albeit slightly narrower than the stairs leading from the first floor to the second. The wood risers of the stairs were warped and worn, but they were sturdy. Selena grabbed the white painted railing. The paint was dirty from years of use, and it was chipping. She headed up the stairs. Although Selena had explored the attic with delight when she and Kate had toured the house before they bought it, she hadn't been back up to the slope-roof space since they moved their stuff into the house. They'd agreed to have their long-term storage items put up here. Everything else was downstairs. Selena hadn't had a reason to come up here, until now. If she was honest with herself, Selena had to admit that she'd been waiting for this opportunity to come up here and look in Kate's trunk. Even distracted as she'd been by the wedding, she'd mentally put finding out what was in the trunk on the top of her to-do list. The mystery of it was chafing at her. Selena got to the top of the stairs and she reached for the string pull for the single exposed bulb that lit the attic. She yanked on the string. Bright white light joined the yellow glow of the sun streaming in through dormer windows on either end of the big space. Because they hadn't yet accumulated a lot of stuff that needed long-term storing, just a few boxes of keepsakes and photo albums, a stack of luggage, and several plastic storage bins filled with holiday decorations. Selena loved holidays. The attic was still pretty wide open. Just a couple dozen boxes were stacked at the south end of the space. Selena looked around, taking in the low cross beams, the insulated underside of the roof, the aged gray wood floor, and the murky glass of the paned windows. She and Kate had plans to finish the attic and turn it into a big rec room, and maybe one day it could be a playroom for their future kids. A lot of work would go into that project, but for now, at least the attic was functional as storage. Selena strode over to the stack of boxes. Kate must have put the trunk behind them. Or not. Behind the boxes, Selena found only more boxes. The trunk wasn't there. She frowned and turned in a circle. Given that the attic had no closets or hidden rooms, it was obvious the trunk wasn't where Kate had said he was going to put it. He'd lied. Selena ground her teeth. She felt her shoulders tighten. All her suspicions, which she tucked away successfully since that moment during the wedding, flooded back in. Her husband was keeping something from her. Or had he gotten rid of the trunk after all? Selena would bet big money that he hadn't. Huffing in annoyance, Selena left the attic and trotted back down the stairs. She closed the door to the attic and stood with her back to it. She looked up and down the hall. Where had Cade stashed that trunk? Well, if it was in this house, Selena was going to find it. She closed the door to the attic and thought for a moment. Where would he put it? The garage, she decided. That's where she would have put it if she'd been Cade. The garage was much more Cade's domain than it was Selena's. It was a 3-car garage, and he planned to turn 1/3 of it into a workshop. The other 2 stalls would be for their vehicles. Although Cade had a lot of tools and athletic equipment and gardening stuff, there wasn't so much of it that it could bury a trunk. It only took about 15 minutes of poking around the garage to determine that the trunk wasn't there. Now what? Selena returned to the house. The farmhouse wasn't huge. It was only about 2,000 square feet, with 3 bedrooms and 1.5 bathrooms. In all, the home had 5 closets plus a pantry. Selena started in the pantry. She was pretty sure the trunk wasn't there because she'd been in and out of the room several times, but it could have been buried under boxes of pots and pans she hadn't opened yet. It wasn't. Selena moved on to the coat closet. No luck. She tried the linen closet, the closet in their room. Again, she didn't expect to find it there and didn't. And the closet in the room they were going to set up for guests. No trunk. The last closet was in what was now a completely empty room. They hadn't decided on what this room would be, so they just closed it up for now. Selena hadn't been in it at all since the day they made their offer on the house. The door to the empty room creaked when Selena pushed it open. The sound was so reminiscent of the soundtrack of a scary movie that Selena wouldn't have been surprised to find the trunk sitting right inside the door, opening like the gaping maw of a demon ready to. Selena stepped into the room. It was empty. Setting her jaw, Selena marched across the room and jerked open the closet door. She frowned. Although the closet's hanging rod was empty and the shelf above it was bare, beneath the rod and the shelf was a stack of boxes. This closet should have been as empty as the room. Why were there boxes in it? Selena reached for a box. She lifted it and practically tossed it over her head. It was so light that her lift was overkill. She shook the box. It was empty. Selena picked up the next box and the next. Every box was empty. Why would Kate have filled this closet with empty boxes? They'd agreed to break down the boxes for recycling. There was only one reason to stack up empty boxes. They'd been used as a makeshift screen to hide something. Heat beginning to pulse in Selena's ears, she started tossing empty boxes out of the closet. 8 empty boxes. She threw them onto the vacant room's wood floor. Then she looked at a pile of blankets behind the boxes. What were those blankets doing in here? They should have been in the linen closet. There was also only one reason for the stack of blankets. They created a nice thick cloak. They too were meant to hide something. Emitting a growl of anger, Selena threw aside the blankets, and there it was. The trunk, squatted in front of her. Its 2 clasps and a centered lock looked not unlike a grumpy face looking up at her. A grizzled, grumpy face. Selena didn't waste any time. She dropped to her knees. She undid the clasp with 2 loud metallic clicks. Then she tried to open the lock, but it wouldn't open. It was, well, locked. Where would Cade keep the key? Selena sat back on her heels. The key could be anywhere. Selena peered at the lock. Could she pick it? Selena gave the trunk a dirty look, then stood and strode out of the room. She trotted along the hall and jogged down the stairs. She ducked into her office. Sitting, she opened her laptop and got on the internet. Her fingers were poised over the keyboard, preparing to type in how to pick a streamer trunk lock. But then she dropped her hands. She closed the laptop. To heck with it. She didn't want to mess around with learning how to pick a lock. She'd be better off breaking the lock. Selena got up and left her office. It took just a few minutes to return to the garage and get some tools. Not sure what she'd need, Selena grabbed a hammer, a crowbar, and a couple of screwdrivers. Once she had them, she returned to the house, ran back up the stairs, and strode into the 3rd bedroom. She dropped to the floor in front of the trunk. Selena had never needed to open a streamer trunk before, so she didn't know what she was doing. Maybe she should have found a video about prying open a trunk before just assuming it would be a breeze. She discovered quickly that the crowbar and hammer weren't helpful. Pounding and prying with the large tool did little more than make a lot of noise and put a few more jagged tears in the filthy brown duck cloth that covered the trunk's wooden slats. When Selena abandoned the larger tools though, and picked up the screwdrivers, she had more luck. She finally popped the lock free from the trunk by using a 2-pronged prying attack with both screwdrivers. When the lock pinched loose from the trunk and clattered to the floor, she dropped the screwdrivers and did a little fist pump. Yes, she crowed. Eagerly, she put her hands on both sides of the lid. She started to lift it. From downstairs, a thud told Selena the front door had just closed. She heard footsteps. Cade's footsteps. Cade, her conniving, sneaky husband, was home, and boy, was he in trouble. Her anger trumping her curiosity, Selena let go of the trunk's lid. She leaped to her feet and ran out of the room. She raced down the stairs to confront her lying husband. Cade looked up from shaking water out of his hair when Selena reached the bottom of the stairs. Boy, it's really coming down out there, Cade said. Thought I'd come home and have lunch with my beautiful wife, and halfway here, the sky decided to try to drown me. Selena glanced out of the window. It must have started raining while she was getting the trunk unlocked. She hadn't even noticed. Selena looked back at Cade. She saw that his dark green polo shirt and his khakis were drenched. Normally, Selena would have made a joke about getting him out of his clothes, but she didn't feel like joking. She didn't care how soaked he was. Selena clenched her fists against her hips. Why didn't you put the trunk where you said you were going to put it? Cade wiped his face and looked at Selena. What? The trunk. You didn't put it in the attic. You hid it behind empty boxes and blankets. Why did you do that? Cade's face went so stony that it really could have been chiseled. Did you open it? Selena frowned at him. She didn't answer his question. Cade rushed over to Selena. His sopping loafers made squishy slapping sounds on the wooden floor. He grabbed her arms. Did you open it? He repeated. This time, he threw out the words so fast that they ran together. You didn't answer my question, Selena said. Cade gave Selena a little shake. Did you open it? Selena grimaced as Cade's fingers tightened on her arms. She jerked out of his grasp and stepped away from him. Did you open it? He repeated. This time the words were spaced apart. Did you open it? His tone was low, almost threatening. No, Selena barked. I was about to, but I heard you coming home and... Cade didn't wait for her to finish. He brushed past her and pounded up the stairs. Selena gaped at him for an instant. Then she shook off her surprise and ran after him. Cade got to the third bedroom seconds before Selena caught up to him. By the time she did, he was on his knees in front of the trunk. Taking a deep breath, he lifted the trunk's lid. Selena stepped behind Cade and looked down into the trunk. She exhaled her pent-up breath. The trunk was empty. Completely empty. No, Cade breathed. He lifted his head and looked around. He was ashen. His gaze darted around the room. His eyes moistened. For a second, Selena thought he was going to cry. Then he wiped a hand over his face and looked back down at the empty trunk. Selena didn't know what she'd expected to find in the trunk, but seeing it empty had flooded her with relief. She still didn't know what the deal was with Cade in the trunk, but at least it didn't contain something horrible. I'm so sorry, Selena said. Selena put her hand on Cade's shoulder. Through his wet shirt, she could feel his shoulder trembling. In spite of being drenched, he didn't feel cold, so she assumed he was shaking because he was so angry with her. She had, after all, not only made it clear she didn't trust him, she'd violated his trust too. She poked into his private stuff. She'd have been furious if he'd done that to her. Not that she had anything to hide. I'm really, really sorry, she said. I don't know. It just bugged me why you were so secretive about that stupid trunk. But I'm so sorry. I should have trusted you. I shouldn't have. Cade stood. He turned and wrapped his arms around Selena. It's okay, he said. It's okay. Selena wasn't sure it was okay. Pressed against his wet shirt-covered chest, she could feel his racing heart, and she could feel the tightness in the muscles of his arms and shoulders as she returned his embrace. She also smelled something she never smelled on Cade before. It was the odor of rancid sweat. She stepped back and looked at his face. His forehead was moist. He wiped away the rain, so it wasn't that. It was perspiration. He was scared. That was what she was smelling. It was the stench of fear. Selena knew it wasn't okay, no matter what Cade said. She didn't discover how not okay it was, though, until that night. Cade had settled himself pretty quickly after he closed the trunk and stuck it back in the closet. He ignored the scattered empty boxes and the blankets. It was as if he didn't see them. More likely, he didn't want to explain why he'd gone to such lengths to hide an empty trunk. Selena was so reassured by the empty trunk that she didn't press Cade about why he'd hidden it in the way he had. Instead, she said brightly, I'll make us tuna sandwiches. Cade had changed his clothes, coming downstairs in another pair of khakis and a dark blue polo shirt. Cade's wardrobe was a little limited. He had made small talk about his work while they ate. Selena had told him about her morning walk. The conversation had sounded okay, with all the right bits of humor, but it hadn't been quite right. There was an undertone to their words, one that they both ignored. Cade had returned to work after lunch. Selena forced herself to put the whole trunk business out of her mind. She had to get some work done too. Dinner was a little more normal than lunch had been. She tried a new pasta recipe and Cade said he loved it. He'd even had a second helping. Only the barest trace of tension had remained between them by the time they gotten ready for bed. The tension returned though when Cade gave Selena a peck on the cheek and told her he was exhausted and needed to go right to sleep. Usually they cuddled before settling in, snuggling together and talking drowsily about their plans for the next day. Not that night. Cade got under the covers and closed his eyes. Selena was wide awake, but she got into the bed next to him and turned out the light. They lay next to each other, not touching, not talking. Selena listened to Cade's even breathing. He was pretending to be asleep, but he wasn't. There was an ongoing hiss in his breath when he was really asleep. Selena didn't hear the hiss. Selena, who practiced meditation and yoga, was more adept at feigning sleep. She slowed her breathing and relaxed all her muscles. She knew she appeared to be asleep, but she wasn't. Selena wasn't sure how long she focused on her breathing before she heard Cade stir. She felt the covers lift. A cool air current fluttered against her bare arms. The mattress shifted. Cade was up. The floor creaked. He was moving away from the bed. Selena just barely opened her eyes. She shifted her head slowly and quietly. Because they hadn't yet agreed on a color scheme for the bedroom, the 2 paned windows that looked out over the backyard were covered only with the flimsy shears that the previous owners had left behind. The shears did little to block out light. Now they let in the radiance of a 3/4 moon in filmy shimmers that sprayed across the room. Selena could clearly see Cade in that gleam. Selena watched as Cade got down on his knees. His head disappeared below the level of the mattress. He seemed to be looking under the bed. Cade raised his head. Selena closed her eyes. She listened to his footsteps move away from the bed. She opened her eyes again. Cade was moving around the room slowly. It looked like he was searching for something. His head swiveled left and right and back again as he moved from his side of the room to hers. On her side, he opened the closet door. He looked into the closet, pushing back clothes for a few seconds, then shut the door. Selena closed her eyes again when Cade turned around. She concentrated on her easy breathing as Cade rounded the bed and got back under the covers. This time, Cade's breathing settled into his familiar hissing rhythm a few minutes after he lay down. It took Selena a while before she joined him in sleep, and that sleep didn't last long. Cade's footsteps woke Selena. Lying on her side now, she glanced at the clock. It was only an hour since they first turned out the lights. Cade was on the prowl again. Listening intently, she could tell he was going through the same searching routine. Selena debated whether to turn on the light and ask Cade what he was doing. Before they moved into this house, before she found out about his peculiar attachment to the trunk and his mysterious past at Freddy's, Selena would have met the issue head on. She wouldn't have hesitated to ask Cade what he was doing. Now she knew even if she did that, she wouldn't get an answer. And she wasn't up to dealing with any more of Cade's evasiveness just yet. Cade got back in bed and he returned to sleep. So did Selena. They repeated this process 3 more times that night. Cade looked wiped out when he got up to go for his run. Selena was so exhausted that she went back to sleep until Cade returned from his run. She pretended she was still asleep while he showered and got ready for work. She didn't get out of bed until she heard his SUV head down the driveway. Selena put up with Cade's nocturnal paranoia for nearly a week before she finally had to ask him what was going on. By then, she was dragging from lack of sleep. She was fed up. On the 7th night that Selena woke up to see Cade looking under the bed, she sighed heavily and leaned over to turn on the ginger-jarred lamp on her nightstand. Cade's head shot up, his hair disheveled. He blinked into the sudden illumination. He looked like a little kid caught in the act of some mischief. Selena scooted into a sitting position. "What exactly are you doing?" she asked. Cade blinked again. "What do you mean?" he asked inanely. Selena pulled the covers up and crossed her arms over them. "Don't play dumb. You know what I mean. You've been jumping in and out of bed like a jack-in-the-box for the last week. What's going on? You act like you're checking for the boogeyman." Cade rubbed his eyes and made a face. Sighing, he pushed himself up and sat on the edge of the bed. Selena stared at his broad shoulders and at the way his hair curled behind his ears. She loved those curls. "Cade?" Cade turned, then slipped under the covers with her. She lay back and shifted so she could look at him. He laid down too, facing her. Selena reached out and touched Cade's cheek. It was rigid and cold. She looked at the dark circles under his eyes. They'd been there since the night he started acting paranoid. Cade reached up and caught her hand. He kissed her knuckles. "I never wanted to tell you about any of this. I just wanted to forget it. But now, Cade, what is it? What's going on?" Cade took a deep breath. He opened his mouth, then closed it. He pulled away from her. "Sorry. I need to stand for this." Selena's stomach lurched. What was he going to tell her? She sat up again, but she wrapped herself in the comforter. Even though the room's temperature was mild, she felt icy. Cade began to pace around the room. "Mom told you that someone stole Lally, but that isn't true," he said. He glanced at Selena. She didn't say anything. She concentrated on composing her face into an expression of calm non-judgment. "What happened," Cade went on, "was that they were doing renovations in the Pizzaplex, and the construction scaffolding collapsed during a round of Lally's game. The collapse punched a hole in the game's exterior wall." Cade stepped over to the window and looked out into the night. The moon was close to full now. Its silvery radiance put Cade in the spotlight. The auditorium was evacuated, and Lally's was closed down because Lally went missing, Cade went on. "It was assumed he'd been stolen." "But you said that's not what happened," Selena said. Cade glanced over at her. He shook his head, then turned back toward the window. For weeks after the Lally's game arena was closed, I kept seeing Lally. I saw him everywhere. He and him, Selena thought, not it. I saw him on top of my shelves one day, Cade said. One afternoon, he was on my desk, behind my toy astronauts. Once, I parted the coats in my closet, and I saw Lally standing there at the back of the closet, looking out at me. I saw him once in the bathroom, behind the shower curtain. Several times, I spotted him in the backyard. He was always hiding, like he was playing a perpetual game of hide and seek. Goosebumps crept up Selena's arms. She rubbed them. Whenever I spotted him, he was always frozen on the spot, always smiling that half smile he had. Cade stopped talking. He rubbed his own arms as if he had goosebumps too. Selena cleared her throat. Was someone playing a joke on you? Cade turned. His expression was resigned. I wish. No. Lally followed me home. Selena's breath caught. Her heart started thumping so hard in her chest, she was sure Cade could hear it. Lally messed with me for weeks before I finally stopped him. Cade gave Selena a slightly triumphant grin. You know Mom's sewing room? Selena nodded. One day when she was at one of her meetings, I took everything out of that room. It wasn't much then. She just had the sewing machine on the table, that dummy she pins her patterns on, and a few plastic storage bins. I emptied the room, and I dragged the trunk into the room. I figured Lally wouldn't be able to resist hiding in the trunk. Selena bit her lip and remained silent. I waited an hour, Cade said. Then I ran into the room and I locked the trunk. I trapped him. Selena frowned. Did you look in the trunk to be sure he was there? Cade shook his head. I didn't want to risk him getting back out. I just locked it. I knew he was inside. Selena gazed at the man who up until this moment she thought was one of the smartest people she'd ever met. Cade was a programming genius, and he could talk about almost any subject. His mind was sharp, and his logic was impeccable, usually. The only thing Selena could conclude about what Cade had just said was that some part of his psyche was stuck in his childhood. He'd been so traumatized by the destruction of his favorite game that he created an elaborate fantasy around it. That had to be it. Obviously, Cade hadn't trapped anything. He'd locked an empty trunk. But in his childhood fantasy, he convinced himself that his tormentor had been contained. It was his confidence that he locked up Lally that made his fear of the robot go away. That was why he stopped having hallucinations about Lally. He'd obviously been hallucinating. There was no other explanation. Cade returned to the bed. He sat down and rotated toward Selena. Say something. Selena took a breath. Then she laid out her theory. She finished with a story from her own childhood. My best friend, Zoe, you remember me talking about her, went through a phase when we were in the first grade. She was sure this big purple monster was living under her bed. I mean, she was sure of it. She talked about it all the time. Eventually, her parents did something similar to what you did. They said they were laying a trap for the monster, and they caught, Selena put air quotes around the word, the monster in a big box. After that, Zoe was fine. The same thing happened to you. When a child is convinced that something is trapped and can't hurt them anymore, the fear of it disappears. Cade started shaking his head in the middle of Selena's story. By the end, he was shaking his head so hard that his hair was whipping into his eyes. Lally isn't an imaginary purple monster. He's real. And he was in that trunk before you unlocked it. Selena didn't miss Cade's use of the present tense. Lally isn't, not Lally wasn't. Selena decided to set this troubling detail aside for the moment. It was more than she could deal with. She scooted across the bed and took Cade's hand. Cade, honey, nothing was in that trunk. You were a little boy, a traumatized little boy, and you reassured yourself by telling yourself Lally was locked into the trunk. That's why you stopped seeing it. It's basic psychology. Cade didn't respond. For several seconds, he was frozen, staring at the floor. Finally, Cade reluctantly squeezed Selena's hand. We need to get some sleep. He got under the covers. Turn off the light, he said. Selena opened her mouth to object. She knew Cade was rejecting her explanation, but she was tired and she didn't want to think about it anymore. She turned off the light and lay down. Cade scooted over and wrapped her in his arms, spooning her. Selena forced herself to concentrate on Cade's familiar warmth, and she made herself ignore the frantic pace of his beating heart, which she could feel against her back. Even after Cade's heart rate slowed and he settled into sleep, Selena once again remained awake for a long time. The next couple of weeks passed relatively uneventfully. On several nights, Selena and Cade spent the evening with Janice. They helped her with chores and had dinner with her. If they weren't with Janice, Cade worked late. He worked so late that he missed dinner. He'd come home just before 10 or so. They'd have a cup of tea or hot chocolate, talk about their day, and then go to bed. Both Selena and Cade were sleeping fitfully, but they were sleeping. If Cade was getting up during the night, Selena didn't hear him. The dark circles under his eyes, though, didn't go away. Selena kept herself busy during the day with both work and renovations. The first week after Cade told her about Lally, Selena threw herself into setting up her home office. She refined the hardwood floor and painted the walls a mossy green. Hanging curtains in stripes of gray and the same green as the walls, she then went out and found the perfect rug, desk, credenza, and new set of filing cabinets. She hung her favorite prints on the walls, and she declared the office done. Once she was finished with the office, Selena demolished the half bath. It felt great to swing a sledgehammer over and over. Slamming heavy steel against porcelain tiles was deliciously cathartic. Over the weekend after she destroyed the bathroom, Selena and Cade tiled the floor and installed a new toilet, vanity, and sink. They worked from sun up to sundown both days. Was there something a little frenetic about their pace? Probably, but neither of them mentioned it. After they finished the half bath, Selena turned into the eccentric painting lady. After they agreed on a pale taupe color for the walls, with white trim, she painted the entire main floor. When she was done, she and Cade went on a marathon furniture shopping spree, purchasing an antique cherry dining room set, a navy blue sofa and love seat, a navy blue rug with a cream and taupe geometric pattern, an oak coffee table and 2 matching end tables, and a pair of antique brass lamps for the end tables. Selena found the perfect taupe and dark blue tweed drapes for the living room, and then she feverishly bought throw pillows and art. She spent several hours arranging and rearranging the furniture, finally setting on a configuration that put the sofa and love seat in the middle of the room. She positioned them so they flanked the fireplace. The dining room and living room were done by the end of the month. The kitchen was going to require a professional, so they hadn't tackled that yet. However, with most of the main living areas complete, Selena decided it was time to have some people over. Cade had made many new friends on the job. On the few nights he didn't work late, he and Selena were invited to several dinners so he and Selena could get to know Cade's new co-workers and their spouses. Between these people and the friends Selena was making on her walks and during her shopping trips, they were developing an enjoyable social network. "Let's have the Petersons, the Taylors, and the Lees over for dinner this weekend," Selena suggested one night as they cuddled on the sofa, sipping hot chocolate. "We owe them all dinners." "We owe them?" Cade said. He grinned at Selena. "Did I miss something? Did we sign a tit for tat contract when we had dinner at their houses?" Selena lightly smacked his thigh. "You know what I mean." "Yes, I do, Miss Etiquette." Selena rolled her eyes. "I'm thinking something casual. It's warm enough. We could barbecue." "Sure," Cade said. He set down his mug and put his arm around Selena. "That sounds fun." On nights like this, Selena could almost convince herself that everything was fine. She could almost forget about the trunk and about Lally. Almost. The night of the barbecue, they had perfect weather. It was warm and the sky was full of sparkling stars that looked like they had been hung above their heads like party decorations. After a feast of burgers, macaroni salad, green salad, chips, and corn on the cob followed by homemade brownies, Janice's recipe, Cade said they tasted just like his mom's. The 4 couples settled around the gas fire pit Selena had installed just days before the get-together. They all reclined on the plush navy and cream striped patio chairs she bought the day before. "How about charades?" Selena asked. Grace Peterson, a petite woman with short cropped blonde hair, popped out of her chair. "I want to be on Hugh's team." She poked her husband, Ron, and made him change places with her. Ron, an unusually pale guy with long brown hair, rolled his eyes as he good-naturedly gave in to his wife's game of musical chairs. He noticed Selena's questioning look. Hugh is a film and literature buff, he explained. "More like a trivia nut," Hugh Taylor's wife, Teresa, said. A tall, broad-shouldered redhead, Teresa dwarfed her short, bald husband. But appearances aside, they appeared to be a perfect match. It was impossible to miss that they were crazy about each other. Selena grinned. "Well, then I want to be on Hugh's team too." Everyone laughed. Grace stood. "I've got one." Hugh and Selena and their other teammate, Ava Lee, an athletic brunette, looked up at her. When Grace made the universal sign for movie, Hugh winked at Selena and Ava. They grinned. Grace held up 6 fingers. 6 words, Selena said unnecessarily. Grace held up 1 finger. First word, Ava said. Grace nodded. Then she shook her head. She held up 1 finger again. Selena frowned, confused. Point? Hugh asked. He leaned towards Selena. The clue is the 1 finger. Point Break, Selena shouted. Cade snorted out a laugh. That's just 2 words, sweetie. Selena blushed. Grace shook her head. She started lifting and lowering her arms as if she was flying. The birds, Selena blurted. She blushed deeper the second the words were out of her mouth. Then she laughed. Ignore me, I'm math challenged. Everyone else laughed too. Grace chewed on her lower lip, then her eyes lit up. She bared her teeth and shifted her gaze to the far left. She looked deranged. Again, Selena shouted without thinking, The Shining! She was pretty pleased with herself for realizing Grace was mimicking the star actor's crazed expression in that movie. Everyone laughed. Selena clapped a hand over her mouth. She shook her head, then dropped her hand and laughed too. I really can't count, can I? She looked over at Hugh. He smiled at her. Then he calmly said, 1 flew over the cuckoo's nest. Grace clapped and rushed over to give Hugh a high five. Selena shook her head, sorry for being so dense. Ava laughed. It's the adrenaline. Who has time to count words? I almost said The Shining too. You just beat me to it. Selena was relieved that no one was making her feel stupid for blurting out 2-word answers to a 6-word clue. Ron stood and began acting out a clue for his team. They played 3 rounds of charades. Hugh was a walking trivia encyclopedia, so he easily guessed whatever his teammates acted out. After the first round, Selena kept her mouth shut to avoid further embarrassment. But her team soundly beat Ron's team, which included Teresa, Cade, and Ava's husband, Marshall. Finally, Ron threw up his hands. I give up. We need to play something else. He picked up his plastic mug and looked into it. Selena stood. Would you like another cream soda? Ron glanced at the big ice-filled bowl that held the canned drinks. I think I drank them all. Selena laughed. We have more out in the fridge in the garage. I'll go get some. I can drink something else. I don't want to be a bother. No bother, Selena assured him. Ava tapped Marshall. Why don't you go get your guitar from the car, sweetie? We can play Name That Tune. Hugh groaned. Ava winked at Selena. Music is the dark hole in Hugh's trivia verse. Selena grinned. I'm pretty good at coming up with song titles. Hurry back then, Ava said. We'll keep the same teams. Maybe you can carry Hugh. I'm hurrying, Selena said, chuckling. What a fun night, she thought, as she headed around the house to the garage. She was really glad she suggested it. Selena hadn't had much one-on-one time with Cade during the evening, but she'd been watching him. He'd been at ease, laughing and talking easily. He seemed like his old self. What a relief. Pushing open the back door to the garage, Selena flipped on a light. They ran out of bulbs with the right wattage, and they'd had to substitute wimpy 60-watt bulbs in the overhead lights. The bulbs didn't throw enough light to brighten the whole garage. Much of the space sat in the pockets of dingy darkness. Selena went past the SUV and their new small red pickup. They'd driven it home the previous week. She strode toward the extra fridge tucked against the wall. The fridge was flanked by several stacks of boxes Cade hadn't had time to unpack yet. His workshop space was still waiting to be set up. Next to the boxes, the lawnmower, weed whacker, blower, bush trimmer, hoses, and a few other yard maintenance odds and ends were in a tangle that Cade promised he'd sort out soon. Next to this jumble, a shop vac sat on top of a metal workbench that Cade hadn't yet put into place. As Selena reached the fridge, her gaze skimmed over the shop vac. She started to open the fridge door. Her hand froze. She flicked her gaze back toward the shop vac. Selena's heart catapulted into her throat. She gasped. Next to the shop vac, a small white robot with black eyes stood upright. It was Lally. It had to be. It looked just like the robot in the photos. The robot didn't move, but it was facing Selena. She felt like it was watching her. For several seconds, Selena was frozen. While her heartbeat galloped and invisible mites crawled along her arms, she stared at Lally in shock. When Lally remained motionless, Selena whipped open the fridge and grabbed a 6-pack of cream soda. Letting the fridge door slam, she looked toward the shop vac again. In the seconds it took her to open and close the fridge and look that way again, she debated whether she wished the robot would be gone or still be there. Which would be worse? The robot was still there. Selena turned and raced back through the garage. Slamming the door behind her, she ran around the house, slowing her pace only when she was within view of her guests. Back near the gas fire pit, she handed a can of soda to Hugh and put the rest of the sodas in the bowl of ice. She casually walked over to Cade. Marshall was tuning up his guitar. Everyone else was chatting. Cade was having a conversation with Ava about some coding issue they were facing in the project they were working on together. Selena stepped up beside Cade and put a hand on his arm. She couldn't miss the fact that her hand was trembling. She looked at Ava. "Sorry to interrupt, but I need to steal him for a minute." Cade raised an eyebrow in question. I need you in the garage a minute, honey," Selena told him. "Everything okay?" Cade asked. Yeah, just..." She gave Ava a tight smile. "Sorry, I'll bring him right back." Ava smiled. "No problem." She turned toward her husband. "What is it?" Cade asked as Selena grabbed his hand and pulled him toward the garage. She was trotting. He stumbled over a tree root. Then he too started jogging, picking up on her urgency. Selena hesitated to the garage door. "Are you going to tell me what's wrong?" Cade asked. Selena didn't answer him. She took a deep breath and opened the door. The garage lights were still on. She left them on purposefully. She hadn't wanted to turn them off before she was out of the garage. Not with that thing in there. The fact that it wasn't moving when she left had done very little to lower her panic level. Selena stepped into the garage and pointed toward the shop vac. "Look," she said. After she spoke, she got up the courage to do the same thing she was asking Cade to do. "What am I looking at?" Cade asked. Selena blinked at the empty spot on the workbench next to the shop vac. The robot was gone. "It was there," she said. "What was there?" Cade asked. "Did a raccoon get in here? I shooed one away last week." Selena shook her head. She quickly scanned the garage. The robot wasn't in sight, but that didn't mean anything. The garage had way too many places to hide. Selena groaned. Now she was getting as paranoid as Cade was. Cade stepped in front of Selena. "I'll ask again. What's going on?" Selena looked up at him. She swallowed. I saw Lally. I think it was Lally. It was a white robot that looked exactly like the one in the picture and..." "Where'd you see him?" Cade interrupted. Selena pointed, "Next to the shop vac." Cade strode across the garage. He looked all around the workbench and behind the boxes on either side of the fridge. Then he turned and began searching the rest of the garage. Selena stood near the door, poised for reasons that had no foundation in logic. To run. Her mind was a tangle of incoherent thoughts. A funny white noise-like sound buzzed in her ears. What was going on here? Cade returned to Selena. A furrow bunched the skin between his brows. "I didn't imagine it," Selena said. "I didn't say you did," Cade said. "But," Selena began. Cade took her hand. She didn't resist when he pulled her out of the garage and closed the door behind them. He too left the lights on. "We have guests," Cade said. "They're going to be wondering what we're doing." Selena nodded. He was right. Now wasn't the time to talk about what she'd seen. It wasn't the time to think about it either. They rounded the corner of the house, and Selena pasted on her happy hostess smile. "Sorry about that," she called out. "A little rodent issue," Cade lied. Selena noticed how natural the lie sounded, but she didn't take the time to think about that either. The day after the dinner party, Cade was gone when Selena woke up. She found a note on his pillow. The note, she knew immediately, contained another lie. "Sorry. Got called into work. Love you." Cade never got called into work on a Saturday. He was merely avoiding her. He didn't want to talk about what had happened. Well, neither did she. She wanted to forget about it. Selena got up and looked outside. The day was bright, but she didn't feel like taking a walk. What did she feel like doing? The truth was that however much she wanted to forget what happened, Selena was rattled by it. Really, really rattled. Selena got up, pulled on her dark blue terry cloth robe, and went down the hall. What she needed was a long, hot bath. As Selena shuffled toward the bathroom, she thought about the master suite they intended to have. They planned to knock out a wall and steal some space from the guest bedroom so they could create an ensuite bathroom for the master bedroom. They just discussed, a couple days before the get-together, whether to tackle that or the kitchen next. She was thinking the ensuite should come first. Selena went into the bathroom. She left the bathroom door open. She always left the bathroom door open when she took a bath, even when Cade was home. She didn't like steaming up the room. Turning on the tap at the end of the clawfoot tub under the window, Selena ran the water until it got hot. She adjusted the temperature, put in the drain plug, and poured some muscle-relaxing bath salt into the water. The bath salts were a combination of Epsom salts and geranium and juniper essential oils. Selena inhaled the scents of the oils and let them try to soothe her. They failed miserably, but she hoped the bath itself would do the trick. Because the farmhouse sat at the front of their 5 acres, and the acreage was thick with apple trees around the back of the house, Selena never worried about pulling the shade over the window above the tub. Their property was secluded and private. No one was around.